What's going on, guys, and welcome to another tutorial here on our channel, The Guide. My name is Valerio, and today we have another defensive tutorial that builds upon principles that we discussed earlier on in the FIFA 20 cycle. Specifically, we're going to go over our top 5 ways and concepts and methods to regain possession, which is going to make a big difference both offensively and defensively. The idea is to show you the type of decision making that can lead your opponent to traps and give you the chance to take the ball away from him. Before we proceed, if you are interested in further improving your game, we currently have a 20% sale on the online course using the promo code THEGUIDE20. The course is made up of 25 videos that cover a wide range of topics, and they can all help you tackle plateaus that you're facing if you're trying to reach the next level but you found yourself being stuck. Now, if that sounds like something you'd be interested in the description box down below, you can find a link with more information to that, as well as 2 free sample videos to get you an idea and get you started. So without further ado, let's get into the main part of the video. The mentality of cutting passing lanes is important not only because it's really helpful to create traps and regain possession, but also arguably because it should always be the foundation of your defense. Some people are more aggressive than others, and they decide to attack the ball holder sooner rather than later. Before we look at specific examples, when you're cutting passing lanes, you'll have to keep in mind that the L2 and R2 triggers on PS4 or LT and RT if you're on Xbox are extremely important tools for you to get accustomed with. With the R2 button, you will sprint, and it's relevant here because when you select a player, you'll want to cut the passing lane as fast as possible, so ideally you're going to be sprinting in the direction you want to place your player in. You then use it in combination with L2 to speed jockey or simply jockey to stop and slow down. Now, these are the basic commands and what we use to cut passing lanes, and it complements this philosophy. But if you want to get a better understanding, you can check out the link to a dedicated jockey video in the description below. Now, in this example, we'll be seeing my opponent's counterattack and how I put this idea of cutting passing lanes into practice. So you're going to be seeing who I think he will pass to, my opponent will pass to in every single pass, and then how I react accordingly whenever I actually do cut the passing lane. And you'll see in the first few, I do cut the passing lanes, but it doesn't result in me regaining possession. At the very least though, it does result in my opponent having to backtrack and move backwards. Most FIFA players always want to go forward, so if you can make them go backwards, at the very least, you're making them uncomfortable. All until we finally have the opportunity where we know where he's going to pass next into his cam, and we have a center mid selected, and we decide to switch into him and move in front. So he never makes that first time pass, but I know he still wants that pass, so I'm always ready, and it works as he takes the bait and we run off with the regained possession. It doesn't always have to be a long process, however, when you do cut passing lanes, and you can sharpen your sense of anticipation by taking risks and predicting your opponent's moves. It will be hard, but when it does work, your opponent will always feel like you're one step ahead. And in this particular example, my opponent does get by my midfield, so it becomes harder to cut passing lanes more passively because he's already in front of my defense. However, I did notice that he's the type of player who likes to pass quickly between his 2 strikers when he's on the counter. With that information in mind, we know that we will have to commit at a certain point, or we will simply allow our opponent to get by my goal by passing between his 2 strikers. And this is the moment I chose to do something about it, specifically by selecting my center back, holding down L2 to have better traction and lower center of gravity, and moving towards my opponent, and then sharply moving up so that I am right in between the passing lane. Although this may seem counterintuitive because it leaves a ton of space in behind, it made sense in the situation because our opponent blatantly showed he was not going to run in behind, but he was going to keep passing for as long as possible. Playing this out, you can see how everything goes to plan, and we get right in the middle of everything and intercept the pass. Cutting passing lanes is the foundation, but you can't do that forever against everyone and expect it to always help you regain possessions, because some players will notice if you're way too passive, and they will just wait for a mistake in your coverage. As a result, the next thing to keep in mind is to time your pressure as soon as you've cut away your opponent's options, or as soon as your opponent gives you a reason to stop cutting the passing lanes and to pressure him. In this example here, we are concerned with our opponent passing it into his striker. As a result, I anchor myself down using the L2 jockey button and I cover the option I feel my opponent is going for. Based on the idea of cutting passing lanes, the next step, in theory, would be to switch to my fullback and cover the open winger. However, what my opponent is doing is actually a cue for me to forget about that and use this opportunity to pressure him. He just turned his back on me, so I know he isn't in an optimal position to make a pass. This window of opportunity is perfect for me before he is in a position to then make a pass later on, and so I decide to let go of L2, sprint towards him, and I take the ball away. There are various moments where you will have a window of opportunity to snatch the ball away from your opponent when he's in possession of it and you simply can't intercept it. The first is shortly after his first touch. This is because in these situations, the ball holder is almost stunned for a second and it leaves himself vulnerable to incoming pressure. So it's always important to be ready to attack and press any player's first touch. Now for this to work well, your player switching has to be on point. You'll always want to have someone selected before the pass is received, because as soon as your opponent takes the first touch with his ball holder, you'll have to react quickly to run in there, and you can't do that if you don't have the right player selected. Now, once you have the player selected, if you sprint too early, you risk your opponent reacting by simply doing a first-time pass. If you time it just right though, your opponent will not be able to stop, will not be able to do a first-time pass, and he will be purely dependent on the first touch his player takes or on you mistiming your run. This example here is really good because it builds upon cutting passing lanes, which we just discussed, and as our opponent gets the ball, we put pressure in a way that covers the passing lane above him. The idea there is to force our opponent to take a first touch downwards, and that's exactly what happens. And so while the ball is far away from our opponent's feet because he just took a touch, his first touch on the ball, we swerve around back towards him and we swoop the ball away with him not really being able to do anything because he's not in direct contact with the ball. Another window of opportunity to regain possession of the ball will arise if you manage to figure out where your opponent wants to go and to close him off right as he turns so he just simply runs into you, or you manage to tackle him from a different side. This is a tough concept to execute, but definitely something to think about if you've never done so. It's something many beginners players lack because you can't simply mirror everything by reacting. Sometimes you will have to take a risk and you will have to block off an angle your opponent hasn't taken yet by anticipating his decision as early as possible. Sometimes even anticipating that decision and reacting and blocking off an angle before your opponent has even turned towards that direction himself. This is something that you will definitely have encountered when defending the drag back, because the drag back is a move that allows the dribbler to exit in many different directions at the very last second, so there is a lot of anticipation that goes when defending that move. So if you're interested for that, we do have a dedicated video on the channel that talks about how to defend the drag back, so you can find the link to all of that in the description below. Nonetheless, this clip is really good to illustrate this concept. At first, the idea here was to attack the first touch of our opponent. And while our attempt to do so isn't successful because we don't retrieve the ball yet, at the very least, it did work in putting our opponent in a stressful situation, which is important to note because it will help us and it will help you understand how I decided to anticipate his next move. Now, right here after the initial battle, our opponent is off balance because of the physicality that we put from behind. And he will want nothing more than to back off and move more toward his left side because at this very moment, we were pressuring more from his right side. Because of these reasons, my next move was to pressure him from the other side and completely forget about the right side, hoping that my anticipation that he will back off was correct. And if we play it out, that's exactly what happens. So adapting on the fly allowed us to capitalize on the pressure we put our opponent's ball holder on, and we used the information that we knew to anticipate the decision that our opponent would have made. When someone is sprinting, he has less frequent contacts of the ball, and so the window of opportunity to tackle him will be larger, and then the player dribbling who is sprinting will be at a higher risk of losing the ball. Now, the concept of ball contacts is one that we covered in a video still relevant to this day, so if you're interested to get a stronger foundation on that, you can also check that video out in the description below. However, if you can anticipate if your opponent is about to sprint, and or for how long, you can then time how you decide to rush your defender towards him and how you want to steal the ball while he's still wide open from taking the massive strides that sprinting entails. A trick to this is to select a player from behind or to the side right before or during the initial stages of the sprint of an opponent's dribbler, and this will make your opponent feel like it's safe to explode into whatever space he has because he can see that you're not selecting someone who could potentially tackle him in his stride. After that, you time a switch to a player who is behind and who has the opportunity to rush towards the opponent sprinting. This will allow you to catch your opponent by surprise, and when you time it correctly, he will not have the time or the ball contact to change direction fast enough away from incoming pressure. Regaining possession is a massive part of your entire game. Defensively, it gives you more control because the better you are at regaining the ball and doing something about it, the less you depend on your opponent having to make a mistake for you to get the ball back. Offensively, the better you are at reading your opponent, the more opportunities you will have to counterattack. Alongside the mechanical aspects of L2 and R2, these concepts and situations to look out for will allow you to build your defensive reflexes and quickly spot situations where you have defensive opportunities. And on that note, that's going to be it for me today, so I hope this was useful, and if it was, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll catch you guys next time. We also want to thank our elite supporters over on Patreon, and if you're interested, you can become a patron today to support the channel as well as receive cool benefits in return over at patreon.com/BPG The Guide.